Strive Coaching Studio, guiding business leaders to meet the highest version of themselves. And now, here's Michelle, certified coach and founder of Strive Coaching Studio.
Well, good. So just to get things started, this is the Strive Coaching Studio podcast. And today I wanted to change things up a little bit. And not only am I coming to everybody on video, but I'm also having a guest today, which is super exciting. I really wanted to explore the topic of mixing business and marriage and how to set up for success with that. I personally have owned a business with my husband, and it was the only thing we owned a business the entire time that we were married, actually. So that was an interesting and yet super successful opportunity for us, not without its challenges, of course. And I actually work together with other clients who either work together with their spouses, are considering working together with their spouses, or have family businesses. And so I'm starting to notice that there's some need and interest in understanding and maybe getting some advice and guidance. And I thought, what better person to bring over to talk about this? I wish I knew Jessica a long time ago. But I'm very fortunate to have gotten to know her super well in the past year. Her name is Jessica Farmer, and she is a certified life and marriage coach. And she loves helping clients create powerful and connected marriages where both spouses feel empowered to pursue their dreams and be their best selves together. And I want to welcome her to be a part of this discussion about marriage and business. So welcome, Jessica.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is so much fun. This is one of my favorite topics. So thank you for bringing me on here.
Isn't it wonderful? So what was your first reaction when I said, let's talk about marriage and business? I know you don't talk about business all the time in your everyday, but what were you thinking when I mentioned this to you?
Like my first reaction was like what? I'm not a business coach. But then I was like, oh my gosh, like this is totally like, because I have several clients who are in this situation, right? Where they are in like a family business or they're working with their spouse. And I think it's becoming more and more common. Mm-hmm. And especially, but even more than that, like, coming out of pandemics, like so many people maybe weren't necessarily working with their spouses, but are all of a sudden like working in the same vicinity as their spouse, right? Like,
yes.
And which brings up all sorts of feelings and emotions and problems. So I'm just like excited, and I love this topic. I think it's going to be so much fun.
Me too. It is going to be fun because I think when we think about it, talk about it, and really provide some people some good guidance, it can be an amazing experience for everybody involved.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love, there's nothing better than family businesses or generational businesses or where spouses who have really strong relationships can really come together and create something huge together. It just makes it that much better. Yeah.
Well, and I think like I love history. I love looking at history, especially like histories of like families and like, the dynamics and everything like that. And really like this modern model of like what a family is, where there's like the nuclear family and the 1950s version where the father goes off to work and the mom stays at home, where there is that like separation of work and home. This is a fairly new construct, like just within like the last 100 years or so, right? Like this is a new thing. Traditionally, in the history of the world, like every business was a family business. Like husbands and wives always worked together to provide for their families. And so this is like the idea of that should be separate or that it's best if it's separate is historically not accurate. Right?
That is a really interesting concept. I never even thought about that before. That is a really great point.
Yeah. And so I love that like so many families and relationships are kind of bringing that back together because it can be, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it can bring so many benefits to your marriage and to the business.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's a great segue to kind of talk about some of the benefits. And I'm sure you've heard plenty from your clients as to why they do it and why they see it as an advantage, of course. And yeah, go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think when it works and when a couple can work out all the kinks,
Yeah.
and kind of manage that transition, it can really enhance the intimacy of your marriage. It can really bolster that feeling of teamwork and having like a partnership with marriage where you are both working together for the benefit of each of you as individuals, but also for your whole family, right? Like it really is it's the embodiment of that partnership marriage that we're all looking for. And like you work on the level of trust, right? And the level of communication, just you get more opportunities to practice those skills in multiple settings. So like once you do that, you've become masters at it.
I
Really.
absolutely love that because what I hear so often is that's where their trust is the greatest, is with their spouse and with their family members. So that's having that foundation of trust is many times what triggers the start of a lot of these spouse or family businesses that I've experienced, at least, is you can count on that other person and you know how hard they're going to be invested in the long term, which is huge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it's that level of trust and that level of like getting to know each other in multiple situations, right? You get to know each other and accept each other in like every scenario, right? And when you see your spouse in all those different scenarios, like that builds a much deeper connection and a much deeper intimacy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, and somebody said a great quote to me recently, which I thought was wonderful. I don't know who originated it, but it was something along the lines of a leader is only as good as their marriage. And that
Yeah.
really struck me because the foundation of that marriage being strong is so necessary in your work life, whether you work with your spouse or not, but especially when you work with
Yeah.
your spouse.
Yeah, I love that because it really is like when you're talking about like relationships and like the science behind it, right? Like and the psychology behind it. We start with that foundational relationship of like a parent and child, right?
Mm.
And that provides the security and success for anything else that child does, right? When you have a secure attachment with a parent, like you have a child who is more outgoing and is willing to take more risks. And, it just provides a lot more resilience for that child. And then as we progress and as we grow, that attachment changes from being attached to a parent to being attached to a spouse or a romantic partner. But the same thing is true, right? When we have that secure attachment with our partner, it provides like that foundation for anything else that you're going to do, right? And of course, that doesn't mean that if you don't have a good marriage that you can't be successful.
Right.
Right? It's just, this is statistically speaking that like it gives you a more solid foundation so that you feel that security and that resilience when things do go wrong, right? You have that solid foundation to come back to.
Yeah, that stability is key. And, when there's not stability, you are going to take that wherever you go.
Yeah.
So whether it's whatever you're bringing into the situation is going to resonate through all areas of your life.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, I just want to emphasize that is like how our brains are designed to work, right? We're designed to have, we are, as humans, we are social creatures, and we are designed to have that strong attachment. And that's how anthropologically, like that's how our brains have evolved. And so it's good and it's natural to have that attachment. I think sometimes we tend to think like, oh, I shouldn't have that attachment because then I'm relying on somebody else, or I'm, but really, no, it's good. We're designed to have that connection with a significant person. Yeah. And that's when we have that attachment, that's when we're able really to shine.
Yeah. Absolutely. So before we kind of get too far into kind of all the ways we can make it successful, where are some of the areas where you've heard or seen where there are some pitfalls or some problems, or people kind of get into a little trouble or need some guidance even?
Yes. Because like when we're talking about, like, of course we're talking about the ideal situation, right? And
right.
none of us are in the ideal situation, right? Like there's always going to be something. But I think like the biggest pitfalls are always, like, first and foremost is communication, right? Like it's like communication is key, as like in any relationship, but especially if you've got a business going on too. And so like learning those communication skills, but even more so than like learning the do's and don'ts, it's really like learning to understand first what's going on in your own brain. Mm-hmm. So then you can use the tactics to communicate that with your spouse.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
What do you recommend one does to kind of help themselves through that process to really be able to recognize it in the moments when they need to?
Yeah, that's the trick, is recognizing it in the moment. And at first, like the very first step is like being aware after the fact.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're looking back at the situation and you're like, oh, I see what I was doing there. I can see that I said that thing because I was afraid that he was going to reject me or something like that. Like it's the recognition after the fact. And then once you do that enough, you're carving that new neural pathway in your brain, right? You're literally training your brain to react differently to situations. And the more that you do that after the fact, the easier it becomes to remember it in the moment. And it does take practice, right? Like this isn't something that happens overnight.
Absolutely. Like we talk about all the time, when you're not getting a result that you want, that's your first clue. We need to look at this a little harder.
Yeah. I was just talking to a client the other day about how like really the first indication that something isn't right is if you find yourself getting angry or frustrated or resentful a lot, right? If you have those like three emotions coming up a lot, then that is a really good indicator that there is something going on in your brain that needs some attention.
Yeah. And it's not to say that, because certainly all of our human brains can do that many times for a variety of different situations. And sometimes these emotionally charged type situations, especially if they have to do with business and money, can exasperate that even more.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm talking about like, if out of 30, if you have 30 interactions with your spouse in the last, I don't know, week, and 25 of them have left you feeling angry, frustrated, or resentful,
we have a trend.
Then there's a trend there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the points I wanted to make sure we made in this podcast for everyone is really remembering that, your marriage is an entity of its own, and it has its own life, and it stands, together with the two of you as pillars to support it. And so is your business. And I think sometimes a lot of people believe that they are their business when it's a family business or a couple business or even an individual. And that's not the case. You have a fiduciary legal responsibility to lenders and possibly investors and other credit facilities and a variety of other people, and really making sure to recognize that the two need to be strong and stand on their own, and you have a responsibility to it. It isn't
Yes.
who you are.
Yeah. And I think like to that point, it's, making sure that you're taking time to nurture the relationship in as its own entity.
Yeah.
Like it's funny because it's like there are three parts of your marriage. There's you, your spouse, and the marriage, the relationship. And each of those participant, each of those parts needs to be nurtured and cared for in its own,
Very true.
in its own container, and then of course you add the business in and there's another, element there.
Right.
And so, yeah, like in each of them needs to have its own care plan. It needs to have its own, plan for how you're going to nurture and cultivate that.
Yeah, that's really true, really true. And it's hard for people to sometimes keep that in mind when it's your emotions and your family and your spouse in the middle of all of it, for sure.
Yeah.
Other common pitfalls you see or problems that are typical that you run into?
Yeah. So in addition to the communication aspect, which, is always huge, I think there can tend to be this idea of idealization, right? Like we have all of these grand ideas for how it's going to be. And we do for marriage in general.
Yeah.
But then also like when you bring the business in, it's going to be great when I can retire my husband and he's going to come work for the business. And, and when it actually happens, then, the reality sets in, and there are then you're faced with the reality of that. Maybe I don't really know how to communicate with my spouse very well. Maybe I don't really know what I want. Maybe the structure of our relationship, like how is this going to work in a marriage? Like who has the final say of what? Like what are our definitive roles, right? Like those things are all things that need to be worked out and established at some, hopefully early on in the business. But if not, like certainly the best place to start is where you're at. So if you've been in business for a long time and things aren't working, like start today, start
right now.
It's never too late.
As soon as you hear this podcast, go ahead and schedule a time to sit down and chat about that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very true. And I think you bring up a great point, which is kind of understanding roles and responsibilities. There's probably a lot of different pieces that we could talk about within that, but generally speaking, what are your thoughts on how to structure that?
Yeah. I mean, we could do a whole podcast just on that.
For sure. Yes.
Right. Like, and this is probably an area that you have a little bit more experience with, but from what I have seen, like, it really doesn't matter what the roles you decide on, right? Like what that is, as long as you are communicating clearly about it and that you're both 100% on board. Yeah. Like, and this is where like being like what I call with my clients, being radically honest, right? Like having those conversations and being very, very honest of like, okay, I don't think I can emotionally handle you being a superior to me, or you having, I don't think it would be good in our relationship if for that dynamic to be a play. Is there some other way that we can structure this? Like being radically honest about your individual needs and what you want from what your personal goals are from having this business, and how that's going to fit together with your spouse's goals and what they want, and being willing to kind of go through that wrestling process and figuring out and having it very clear and very defined.
Better to do it early on. And right, like you said, before there's a situation that comes up where you do have all of your emotions that are coming in with it, for sure.
Right.
To
Yeah.
sort all of that out. But yeah, so we were very lucky in my personal situation where we complemented each other very well. And so his strengths and my strengths were very different. And fortunately, it was very easy for us to kind of divide that up and divide and conquer. And each of us knew what our roles were. And it was very clear. And when it came down to making a important decision, it really was determined based on who was kind of in charge of that particular department or that area of expertise. So we could each bring our very best selves to the situation. And we were very fortunate that it complemented my weaknesses, and I did the same with him. And we didn't run into it a whole lot. So I guess I am curious from you, when there is some overlap outside of the communicating, when things come up, any thoughts on how to approach that situation when there's overlap or disagreement?
Yeah, I think it's, as with any kind of compromise, right? That you're working through with your spouse, like it's important like to get really clear on what your need is, right? Like going into that conversation, knowing exactly like, okay, I need to feel like you value my input, or whatever the case may be, right? That's my need in this situation. So how can we structure this in a way to support my needs here? Because again, it's not just a business relationship, right? You're going to have to go home with this person. You're going to have to go home and have an intimate relationship with them, not just, physical intimacy, but although that certainly is an aspect.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
But you have to
you have to eat dinner with them, or, make a
raise
about
kids
children.
together.
Yeah.
Yes. And so and one of the things that I see that kind of gets in the way of that a lot is, you're at the business and you're thinking, okay, like it's a business relationship, right? And it can be a little bit like cut and dry. And one of the best things about having a marriage relationship is that it isn't dry. Right? Like there has to be that element of fun and affection and, drawing together, and like the messiness of life is what is great about your marriage, because you get to experience all that messiness together. And so one of the biggest pitfalls that I see is people trying to separate that too much and say, okay, when we're at work, this is who we are at work. And then when we're at home, this is who we are at home. And when we're talking about like clarity of roles, like that's not what we're talking about. We're like, we want to bring in some of that affection and play into your business relationship too, right? We want the way you are interacting together to be as continuous. Is that a word?
You just invented it if it wasn't.
We want to have as much continuity as possible, right?
Right.
And then bring the family life and the business into that established relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is the fact is you've worked together all day. You've both experienced a lot of things. And depending on what your business is, many times you may not even communicate with each other all day about what happened when you're both busy. And kind of reuniting at night over the kitchen table or while you're cooking or doing dishes might be your opportunity to catch up with each other. So you have to make that positive if you're bringing that into your household, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's kind of this old idea of like, well, don't bring business home, right? Like no talking about business at the kitchen table, right? Which I mean, I have not found that that's beneficial.
Right.
I mean, if that's the place where the time and space that you have to talk about it, go ahead and talk about it. Like I think the best relationships that I've seen that have worked in this way are the couples that have that strong sense of their relationship and then just kind of adding the business into it, as opposed to like what we were like what I said earlier with the separation of this is our business relationship and this is our home relationship, right? It's just
Right.
the relationship.
I agree 100%. And that's what we saw to be very successful too. And kind of pulling back some of the points you made earlier about honesty, at some point, maybe one person's a little more wired up about work than the other one is, or maybe it's a stressful situation. And at some point, it's okay for the other person to say, okay, we need to stop now. Now we're going to shut it off and we're going to move on to go watch TV on the couch and not talk about this anymore. Let's just let this go.
Yeah. Well, and really, like, that's one of the best benefits of having a marriage and a business together, right? Is that your partner knows you to that degree that they can see, okay, we're not going to get anywhere at this point. So let's take a break, because I know this person and I know their reactions and I know like their idiosyncrasies, and so we're just going to take a break. We'll come back to it. Like, let's go watch some TV.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing for sure. Yeah. When it's embraced properly. So what other, when it comes to personalities and strengths and weaknesses and really sort of the day to day, what other advice do you have or opinions, thoughts?
Yeah, this is like one of my favorite things to do with my clients, is like really, because really understanding your spouse and their personality and their strengths and their weaknesses, like this is key to establishing those roles, like we've been talking about. Like, you need to understand like who your spouse is and accept that, right? Mm-hmm. Like sometimes we can see like their personalities and their quirks and things that we necessarily don't love. And we're like, okay, well, that needs to change. Like, let's work on changing and improving that. But really, it's when we see those and accept those and create the structure around it. Like, that's really what's going to create a situation that is beneficial for both of you. Yeah. And like, we can do that in a lot of ways. Like personally, like I love like doing like Myers-Briggs test or Enneagram, like these personality things. And of course there is no personality test that's foolproof.
Sure.
So, but it's just kind of fun to play with, or even like 5 love languages, right? Yep. Like any way that you can get to know your spouse and their preferences and the way that they're reacting to situations. One of the things that I really like about Enneagram is that it's assigned, like your Enneagram number, if you don't know.
I know a little bit. Yeah. There's some do and don't. So share with us.
Yeah. So Enneagram, and I'm not a professional with it, but Enneagram there are 9 personality types. And the basis of what your personality type is really based on your key motivations, which I think is so helpful to know what your spouse's key motivations are.
Be aware of it.
Yes. And so, like, and it's very equally, like, it talks a lot about the strengths, but it also talks about like some of the weaknesses of each personality type.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I am an Enneagram 9, which makes me a great life coach. But it doesn't I'm not like going to be a cutthroat business kind of person just because it's not in my personality type, right? Like, and my key motivation as a 9 is create peace, right? Create peace and avoid conflict, which can be a blessing and a curse. And it's one that I've, had to be very aware of and learn how to work through, because there's always conflict, right? There is no avoiding conflict. And so anyway, like learning that about, first of all, like learning my own personality type has been massive in my own personal growth and, in my business, right? Like learning how to capitalize on that instead of trying to beat myself into submission and try to be something I'm not.
Right.
Right. And then on the flip side of that, like learning about my husband's personality type, which he is a 6. And so, and the key motivations for a 6 are trying to, they are very concerned with like trying to manage the unknown, right?
Okay.
Like not knowing what's coming, right, drives a lot of their actions. And so like once I understand that about my husband, it's like, ding.
Oh,
Right?
it all
Like
makes
light
sense now.
bulb. Yeah. And so like some of the whenever he is like coming to me and he's going through worst case scenarios about something, which was a trait that used to drive me crazy. I was like, why are you so pessimistic? Again, because I'm coming from let's not engage in conflict.
Right.
Like let's just create peace. And then he's coming along and like stirring up all this conflict, which I was like, no, we can't do that. So then like, as we kind of like, once I kind of realized, oh, that's just him. Like, that's how he engages with the world, right? Like the way he creates safety for himself is by looking out for any possible thing that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And so instead of like trying to change him, right? Trying to change that about him, it's like, okay, so what can we do? Like, how does this benefit me?
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, it's benefited me in so many ways because like whenever we go on vacation, he's the one who packs for our family.
Nice.
Because he is very aware of, everything. He plans for any
Worst case
situation.
scenario.
Exactly. And so it's like, okay, so how can we use this? How can we capitalize? This is a strength that he has. So let's use that in a way that's going to benefit our family, that's going to benefit our relationship and the business.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And you've used the term with me before, zone of genius. And I just think that is a fantastic way of describing what you're talking about, really recognizing where that is, because it just helps you really appreciate what this person is contributing to your relationship and to your business that can be hard to find. You may not be able to find that person anywhere else on the planet, really.
Yeah. And like, once you can do that, once you can get to that place of acceptance, that opens you up to a deeper level of like emotional intimacy, because then you're creating a culture of like 100% acceptance in your marriage, which like, that's where the magic is. Like, that's where it thrives, is when both people come and can feel appreciated and accepted.
Yeah. And I love, you said, many times our blessings can be our curse. And I feel like we're all sort of, many of us are becoming more and more aware of that, especially as we get older or deeper into our businesses, that what works really well for us can also be a limiting factor. And when you can know that about yourself and accept that about yourself and each other, you can really help each other and support each other through that and keep each other in check for the benefit of the marriage and the business.
Yes. Yeah. And again, like when you can navigate this, which all of this, like all these things that we're talking about, these are all skills that can be learned, right? It's not like any of us come into marriage, like knowing how to do this perfectly. Right? We can learn how to do any of these things. And when you kind of navigate those waters, you go through that wrestle, like that is one of the biggest benefits of being in business with your spouse, is like being with somebody who knows your zone of genius and 100% appreciates it and has worked and trusts it. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And like you said, communication is key, and that just opens up the doors for even more improved, higher quality communication amongst each other and probably the rest of the company, having that accessibility and authenticity and vulnerability that really will help you have a stronger team in place.
Yeah. And I don't think we can like emphasize that enough is that the culture of your marriage, especially if you like you're the owners of the business, right? Like the culture of your marriage, like that's going to set the tone for the culture of the business. Like if you have
Yes.
employees and everything, like that's going to be the foundation for it. And
Yeah.
so that's why we want to do this work, right? We want to lay that foundation so that so you're setting yourself up for
Yeah.
good and positive things, but also the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I know each other well enough that I am preaching culture constantly, and it doesn't matter what the culture is, except that it needs to be authentic to you and genuine to you, and you need to be very conscious and deliberate about what you're creating. And it's the same. It's the same, and even more important in a business relationship, marriage like this situation or a family business. Because it really sets the tone for the whole company and the success of it, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said something else I thought was really fantastic too, that is really probably would help everyone feel a little better, that nothing is ever perfect all the time. And,
Right.
it's not always ideal. And sometimes you are going to disagree about some things and it won't go as smoothly as you like. And you might not get your way or whatever the case may
Right.
be. And maybe that's just okay. Maybe that's just some days are bad days at work. It just comes with the territory.
Yeah. No, I like saying, like, I love that you said like being intentional about like the culture that you're creating. And yes, like nobody's going to do this 100% of the time. And I think like if we're aiming for like 80-20, if like 80% of the time you're mostly on point, then I think you can create really great and amazing results with 80%, and then if 20% of the time it's a crapshoot, then
okay,
you're good. It's,
we'll take those odds.
That's what it is to be human.
So true. And hopefully you have more frequent good days at the office when you do create a positive spousal or marital or family business that way than you would anywhere else. And if you are able to do that, good for you. Hopefully that's at least one of the reasons that you wanted to do that.
Yeah.
So there's so much opportunity to create it, but it doesn't just happen magically. It's something you need to work on.
Yes, definitely. Intentionality is huge.
Yeah. Okay. So if there's any words of wisdom and important takeaways that we want our listeners to hear right now, what would you say they might be?
I would say to just like cultivate a feeling of fun. Like make it fun. I mean, like nobody wants to be in a business where everybody is serious all the time. Nobody wants to be in a marriage where everybody is serious all the time. And like one of the key, just like really quick, one of the key things that I love talking about with my clients is that like it's this tool that John Gottman talks a lot about, and about like when things start to kind of get escalated, right? Like if you're having a conversation where things get a little bit emotionally murky, or that that we can like there's, oh gosh, now I can't remember the name of it, like what he calls it, but it's kind of a code almost.
Okay.
Like it's kind of, you have like this action that kind of de-escalates the situation.
Okay.
And one of my favorite examples of this is that like like my husband and we were, I don't even remember what we were arguing about.
It must have been very important. I'm sure
it
he was
was
wrong.
Very, very important. Yes, of course he was. And we were, it was very early in our marriage. And so we were arguing about something, and he just looked at me. He's like, well, you're just a big poopy head. And of course, like, I can't like keep a straight face. I bust up laughing, and like, I remembered what John Gottman calls it. It's like a repair attempt.
Okay.
And so like, it's really important to have these like repair attempts in your marriage, like these kind of little things that that you have created in your culture to like de-escalate some of those situations. So now, like whenever we're having like a heated conversation or something, one of us, if it just like gets to be too much, one of us like, well, you're just a big poopy head. And that's like, I mean, it's totally silly. Like, and it's just like one of those things that's just like, okay, it's just a reminder like, okay, yes, things are kind of intense right now, but we both realize like we're in this together. We're like, regardless of what happens here, like
We're connected.
We're connected. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I wonder how many people are going to be using and adopting the new philosophy of you're just a big poopy head.
You're just a big poopy head.
I hope many. I'm pretty sure I'll be using that one. I can imagine that can come in handy in a lot of areas of life.
Yes. Yeah. And that just like creates, like it cultivates that feeling of fun.
Yeah.
And, like,
and it just kind of
so
shocks you out of the thing you were in, the mode you were in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you say emotionally murky? Yeah. But anything when the waters are getting emotionally murky. I love it.
Totally. Yeah.
I love it. Well, Jessica, I know that this is going to be so helpful for so many people. And I really can't just thank you enough and appreciate you enough for coming on here and joining me today and talking about all of this, because I do think it's such a valuable topic. And I know you're passionate about marriages and relationships and, you know, making them the best they can be. And I do think this is a huge part of it. And if it allows more people to be willing to jump into the idea of a family business or a marital business, then I hope that we have accomplished something with that today too. So,
oh, me too. Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun.
Super fun. And if you want more information, you can see Jessica Farmer Coaching. She does have an amazing website. She can be found on Instagram and Facebook as well. You can find her. You will definitely find her, Jessica Farmer Coaching. But thank you for being on the Strive Coaching Studio podcast today. It was awesome. I hope you'll come and join us again another time.
Of course. This will be awesome. I love what you're doing here. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks for listening. For more great tips, visit us on strivecoachingstudio.com.